Okay, great and glorious to be famous one day. Guess who? Nick Dutch coming back on the camera yet again. Not with any ramblings from my mind, but ramblings from Wikipedia. And we're still analyzing what pseudoscience is. From the previous video, we've worked out that the term pseudoscience is more or less gibberish. We've learned that governments and institutions use the term pseudoscience as a means of censorship and constraints of freedom of speech against ideas that they find inappropriate, damaging, or dangerous. So science itself is performing acts of censorship, which is quite intriguing, and using a very woolly, very grey term to demark individuals or schools of thought as being inappropriate or wrong, just because they said so, despite the fact there might still be some benefits there, especially if the experimenters and researchers are actually adhering to the scientific method. Alright, let's go on. The article on Wikipedia continues about the background of what pseudoscience is. The standards for determining whether a body of knowledge, methodology, or practice is scientific vary from field to field. Again, it's all grey and woolly. There are, however, a number of basic principles that are widely agreed upon by scientists, such as reproducibility and intersubjective verifiability, which, as we've learned from our discussion of sociology and certain aspects of psychology and also anti-positivism, that isn't necessarily the case in all schools of science, as in proper science, okay? Such principles aim to ensure that relevant evidence can be reproduced and or measured given the same conditions, which allows further investigation to determine whether a hypothesis or theory related to a given phenomena is both valid and reliable for use by others. But as we've also mentioned on the talking about science, talking about meditation, talking about the occult, that example I gave about dowsing, we can see that we're talking about a number of very complex subjects. So essentially, even the idea of repeatability isn't necessarily 100% reliably the case. Okay, it's expected that the scientific method will be applied throughout, and that bias will be controlled or eliminated by double-blind studies or statistically through fair sampling procedures. I maintain you can probably do that with some occult investigation, okay, such as telepathy, the astral projection experiments I mentioned earlier on, and probably a few others. All gathered data, including experimental environmental conditions, are expected to be documented for scrutiny and made available for peer review. All right, now, when we're acting as amateur scientific researchers, which is what we are, because at home, do you actually have a fully equipped laboratory full of EEG machines, MRI scanners, and the rest of it? Basically, you don't. Nor do you have any way of properly measuring the vitamin and mineral content of your body, and all kinds of other little factors that may contribute to and or affect the results. So essentially, there are aspects of your own scientific experimentation as an amateur scientist working at home doing your own occult experiments, which would be criticized by science. But on the other hand, within an anti-positivistic model, it would still be accepted. If there wasn't this prejudice against certain schools of thought, which is being used as censorship by certain scientific bodies to control the flow of information and what is allowed to be considered to be science and what is not allowed to be considered to be science, thereby allowing further experiments or studies to be conducted to confirm or falsify results, as well as to determine other important factors such as statistical significance, confidence intervals, and margins of error. Alright. And as I was saying, I think that statistics can be applied to the occult, or certain occult phenomena when we're having a look at the results that we can accumulate. I approve of that statement. I like that. But there's so many factors involved, it's difficult to work out precisely which ones have validity and importance or not. Okay. Just want to check the time. A few more minutes to go, we're okay. In the mid-20th century, Karl Popper suggested the criterion of falsifiability to distinguish science from non-science statements such as God created the universe may be true or false, but no test can be devised that could prove them false, so they are not scientific. They lie outside of the scope of science. Popper subdivided non-science into philosophical, mathematical, mythological, religious, and/or metaphysical formulations on one hand and pseudoscientific formulations on the other, although without providing clear criteria for the differences. So, metaphysical formulations do, to a certain extent, even according to Karl Popper, have some overlap with science to a certain degree, but he was rather vague and woolly as to how that should be done. You see, there's everything about this concept of pseudoscience is very, very woolly. It's not providing you with real distinct clarity. All we've got to go by is a scientific method, but that varies from school to school of thought. So that has to be expanded to incorporate a rational and objective analysis of supernatural phenomena, as I call it. Karl Popper, gave astrology and psychoanalysis as examples of pseudoscience, and Einstein's theory of relativity as an example of science. So Karl Popper, despite the fact that he can't provide clear criteria for the differences between pseudoscience and non-pseudoscience, is actually just providing examples to try and suggest what pseudoscience and non-pseudoscience is, which is basically pretty unintelligent. It doesn't demonstrate that Karl Popper actually understood what he was talking about in real, precise, and dare I say it, scientific manner. More recently, Paul Thagard in 1978 proposed that pseudoscience is primarily distinguishable from science when it is less progressive than alternative theories over a long period of time. So he's only saying that something's not science if it's not progressive, if you can't increase knowledge and increase human productivity and other fun things, and the failure of proponents to acknowledge or address problems with the theory. Mario Bunge has suggested the categories of belief fields and research fields to help distinguish between science and pseudoscience. So these are people who are just throwing ideas in the air as to what pseudoscience is without actually having a fixed criteria as to what it is. And it's varying from person to person, from theorist to theorist. So, on that basis, we can't just demark all things occult as being pseudoscience, so long as we're approaching it in a good and intelligent manner. Okay, again, I'm going to stop the video now, and we'll carry on more with the background of pseudoscience.